Joining me right now is John Kluge. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well, Melissa. Thank you.
And you and Christine are going to be talking about charitable giving as well as corporate giving.
I wouldn't necessarily call it giving, I would call it investing.
Investing. So we'll get into the investment side of things and how you look for the best investments to look for. So it looks like she's joined us now. So again, we've got John Kluge, founder and managing director of Refugee Investment Network. Thank you again for joining us. And Christine Mahoney. Christine is coming to us remotely from Charlottesville, Virginia. She's the author of Failure and Hope, Fighting for the Rights of the Forcibly Displaced. And she's also the director of social entrepreneurship at the University of Virginia. Officially welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. So now John was just corrected me in saying that we're going to be really talking about investing, and we're talking about the refugee crisis as well, versus charitable handouts. Can you talk to us about forced immigration? What is it exactly?
Well, maybe Christine should answer this one. What do you think, dear?
Sure.
I should also add, Christine and I are married, so this is a family business.
Fantastic.
So, to your point, humanitarian charitable giving is important in this space, and so I've spent about a decade looking at what were humanitarian organizations, UN agencies doing on the ground to support refugees. And of course, there is an important focus on life-saving food, medicine, shelter. But what I found is that in most cases, refugees are displaced for decades. And when that is the case, it is important to start thinking about more long-term investment in supporting access to livelihood, access to jobs, the freedom to take care of yourself and your family by starting a business, working legally. And so that we're really focusing on forced displacement due to violence. So we're not looking at forced displacement due to hurricanes or climate change right now. There's 65 million people forcibly displaced from their homes due to violence, and some of them have crossed a border. They're called refugees, and some are locked within their country, and they're called internally displaced persons.
Mm-hmm. And it is getting worse, correct? There are host countries that have been taking a number of refugees in, but they're starting to no longer be able to do that, and some are even turning them away. What do people who don't think that they're affected by the refugee crisis need to understand about what's really going on around the world?
Well, it is critically important to recognize that all of us are affected. And so there are countries that we call countries of first asylum, countries like Jordan and Turkey, that are getting the bulk of the displaced. But as those countries are unable to take care of millions upon millions, tens of millions of people, we are seeing those refugees fleeing even further afield to countries like Europe and the United States. And so this is a global problem, and it requires global solutions.
So it seems like to deal with migration and refugees, it's not designed for success. NGOs and foundations don't have capacity to push policy changes, as they are guests in host countries that you just mentioned that are part of keeping systems in place. We don't seem to have political will or political leverage to challenge this really vicious cycle. How do we change that?
Well, I think, Melissa, one thing we can look at is the influence, whether that's been historically positive or considered negative, of private business and investment to improve regulatory and policy environments in other contexts. So with the United States, we have public funds through the Millennium Challenge Corporation that have been invested in countries in emerging markets and have improved some of the regulatory issues, particularly around transparency. We can apply the same kind of methodology, which was really Christine's sort of thesis in her book, using impact investing and blended finance instruments, so different kinds of capital working together to support both the host communities as well as the displaced communities. And so it's sort of a model for shared prosperity.
Mm-hmm. So impact investing, I understand, that's investing into initiatives or organizations that are going to have a return on profit as well as make a positive social or environmental or economic change in a community or a country. But what are blended finance instruments?
Sure. So blended finance, generally speaking, is when you have different kinds of capital, often public and private, or concessional, it's taking a slightly lower return and is open more towards risk, working together. So these are where most displaced people are. These are emerging markets, and sometimes it's hard to do business there. So that's where the blending of capital can really work together. But for us, the important thing is also to invest together with displaced communities, making sure that their voices and your voices out there, if you're listening now, are part of this. And we want to understand what are the barriers to accessing capital, what are the barriers you're facing if you want to start a business, and let's work together to actually overcome those things.
Fantastic. I could talk to you about this all day, but we don't have time. I have one more question really quickly. How do you measure impact with something like the refugee crisis?
So first, I would just say we don't see this as a refugee crisis. We see this as a crisis of hopelessness. And what we can do to work with entrepreneurs and employers is to overcome that by providing some capital and assistance where needed. So I think that ultimately, sorry, what was the first part of your question?
Just how you measure impact.
Yes,
It's different for different causes. It's different for different sectors and
so
for
we
different
want to know,
initiatives.
is this improving your life? Do you have, a job? Most people, regardless of where you come from or where you end up, want a chance to have a livelihood to take care of your family. And that's what this is all about. It's offering you a pathway to dignity and to have a pathway up, not just a pathway out.
Great. Fantastic.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much for joining me in the studio. And Christine, thank you for joining us from Charlottesville. Now I'm